Hello and welcome to the Other Kind of Doctor podcast. My name is Gemma.
And my name is Gaia, and we are both on the journey of gaining a PhD.
A quick disclaimer before we start. We are in fact the academic kind of doctors.
Well, nearly doctors.
Yes, nearly doctors. But we're not your medical kind of doctors.
So if you do need medical attention, please contact your GP.
Now, let's get on with the episode.
Hello!
Hello! Hello!
That was beautiful.
Doing a bit of a sing-song this week. I'm just feeling really positive.
How come?
Well, last week I felt like I was dying of the plague.
Yeah.
We actually didn't record this week. We're having to record twice this week because I was coughing my guts up and I felt really...
It was so attractive.
I felt really poorly. So I think I'm feeling much positive. Now I can actually talk and sound like a normal human being.
Did you at least take some time off from working?
I did actually.
What did you do?
I watched some films and some TV. I actually watched that new One Day series on Netflix and I cried a lot.
I am never going to watch that. I will.
It's a really, really great TV series, but I really cried a lot on that last episode.
Oh, I'm going to try not to watch it, but I know that I will.
Oh, it's really good. Maybe just don't watch the last episode.
Okay, I'll do that. I moved last week.
You finally moved house. Congratulations.
Woohoo, thank you. It was really stressful, but now I'm finally settled in my new bed. Very nice.
Very nice. Oh, well done. You're going to put some new wallpaper up, aren't you?
I will. Well, my partner will for me because I'm short. Fun fact.
Very short. You're what, like 5'2"? 5'3"?
1 foot. Yeah. So what are we going to talk about today?
So we're not talking about TV series or putting wallpaper up.
No.
We're actually talking about whether we think, and this is just our opinion, whether we think doing a master's before a PhD is worth it.
Yes.
This is an interesting topic because I didn't do a master's. I went straight from my undergrad to my PhD.
And I did.
You did do a master's. So we thought we'd have a little chat about that today and kind of what we think the pros and cons and our experiences have been. But afterwards, feel free to our listeners out there to send in what you think. If you did a master's, how you thought it went, if you think it helped your PhD journey, or, you know, if you didn't do a master's and how you managed it.
Yeah.
Let's keep the conversation going. But without further ado,
so professional, Jen.
Keep the conversation going. Maybe I'm just a podcaster now.
A radio host.
We've recorded 7 episodes. I'm basically a radio presenter.
Let's get on with the episode.
Shwum.
So how come you didn't do a master's before your PhD? That was really bold.
It was really bold, and that was because I had never actually planned to do a PhD. Fun fact. I finished my 3rd year of my undergrad and I was applying for jobs. I was looking and saying, what do I do? And funny enough, my supervisor, because I was an RA in my undergrad, a research assistant, my supervisor kind of sat me down and said, Gemma, I really think you should do a PhD. And I was like, really? I kind of perhaps had a bit of imposter syndrome being a first generation university student. I was like, I'm really not clever enough to do a PhD. You know, do you think I should? And she was like, absolutely. And I'll be your supervisor. I know someone else who could be like because she was too busy to be my primary or she had other stuff going on. So she said, you know, I've got, you know, my colleague Dawn, she could be your primary supervisor. Let's develop a project. Mm-hmm. And then we just developed a project. And then 4 months later, I started my PhD. So it was a bit of a weird one. So I didn't really have a chance to do a master's.
Yeah, so it's all her fault, really.
It's all her fault. No, it's funny because if I hadn't had that conversation, I absolutely wouldn't be doing a PhD now because I had no plans to do a PhD. But honestly, it was the best decision I ever made. The reason I didn't apply to do a master's, first of all, financially, I couldn't afford it. So
fair enough.
If you're a UK resident, you can get a loan from the government for your fees. But they don't give you a maintenance loan, so they don't give you anything towards your living expenses. And at the time, I wasn't in a position to do that, so I decided I couldn't do that. But if I had planned to do a PhD, I probably would have found a way to do a master's, if I'm honest. Because in my head, if I go back to 3rd year of undergrad, I probably would have assumed that you needed to do a master's to do a PhD. What about you? What made you want to do a master's? What did you...
So the main reason I did a master's was I wanted to do a PhD since I was in my first year of undergrad.
Really?
Yeah, well, I didn't know what a PhD was. I just knew I wanted to do research. Then I knew that PhD was that. I didn't know what it actually was. So I was like, I need to do everything in my power to get this position. And I was like, surely if I get a master, it's going to be easier. So then I knew I wanted to do a PhD in forensic psychology, so I went to do a master's in forensic psychology.
Oh, and that's how you ended up at Royal Holloway?
Yeah.
Oh, love that. That's really interesting. What do you think is the pros of you doing a master's? What do you think was like a benefit?
Okay. I feel like there's a few. First of all, straight after my undergrad, I was not ready to do a PhD. I still didn't know what a PhD was. I researched it and I was like, I do not understand.
Doctor of Philosophy, but I'm studying psychology. That's something that really confused me. I'm like, why is it a Doctor of Philosophy when I'm studying psychology? Or you could be doing history, but you get a doctorate of philosophy.
Very confusing.
I still don't understand the answer to that question. I'm gonna be honest.
So yeah, I feel like I didn't have enough experience or confidence to do a PhD straight away. So I went on to do this master's in forensic psychology at Royal Holloway actually. And I feel like it was also good because I knew I wanted to do a PhD around eyewitness testimony stuff, but at the same time I was also interested in the general area of forensic psychology. So it was really good to get like more knowledge about the general area, even though it's not strictly related to my PhD. That clinical bit is still so interesting. I'm so glad I learned about it.
Kind of puts your research into context as well,
100%.
doesn't it? Rather than just, I think with a PhD you become so focused on your
tiny
area
and
your tiny research. It's kind of nice to, specialise, but kind of have more of a broader understanding of your area. That's a really good point, actually.
Yeah, oh no, thank you. Another good point was, well, I didn't know this going into it, but now I do. I feel like if you go and do a master's in your specific area that you want to do, you're gonna meet all the academics that are in the area, and it's gonna be easier to like create a relationship with them. And actually my supervisor in my MSc is still my current supervisor in my PhD, because we did my master's dissertation and we found some interesting results and we were like, we might as well do a PhD in this. So that was good.
That's very handy.
Yeah.
And that makes sense actually, because even if your research that you did in your master's really nicely followed on to your PhD, but even if, for example, you were looking at an area or an area of research, you're going to get used to that kind of literature or like the gaps in the research, even if maybe you're not researching the area that you end up doing your PhD in. It kind of gives you a broader understanding of what's missing in the current,
and even on how to do research in general.
The different types of research.
Yeah, I was much more confident in doing research after my master's than I was straight after my undergrad, 100%. So I think those are some of the few pros that I can think of. What about you? What are some of the pros of going straight to a PhD after undergrad?
It actually took me a while to think of the benefits, but I do actually think there is. So the first thing that came to my head, which probably isn't the best thing to say first, but you're not in extra debt. So I would have had, if I did a master's, I would have had to take out an additional loan from the government, and I'm glad I didn't because when I look at my student loan number, basically I just prefer to ignore it because it's such a big number. But yeah, so no extra debt. I think as well, for me, I'm going to get to my end goal quicker. So I finished my undergrad when I was 22, started my PhD when I was 22, and because my PhD is 4 years, I'm going to finish
You were 23, actually.
Was I 23?
Yeah, you started your PhD in January.
Ah, okay, I was 23. But yeah, I'm going to finish when I'm 27. Is that correct, Gaia? Yeah.
I'm 27 right now.
So I'm going to get there quicker, and therefore I'm going to get on with the rest of my career quicker. Also, something I didn't realise is that in your first year of your PhD, or the first year of my PhD, I was able to take some of the master's courses, especially around statistics and things like that. I was able to attend their seminars as a PhD student and still get that knowledge. Yes, I didn't get the master's qualification out of it, but still I was able to pick and choose which modules would inform my research and things like that.
And who cares if you're a master's after you got a PhD?
Oh, don't say that. I think that's still important. Like, for example, I went to, not even statistics, I went to an eye tracking seminar and things like that. So, yeah, that's always really good. sometimes as well, it's not applicable for my PhD, but some PhD programs are 4 years full time, and your first year is a master's. So it's like an all-in-one.
Yeah.
So, but you're not getting the debt that you would from a master's, if that makes sense, because it's included in your PhD funding. I can't really speak more about that because it's nothing to do with me. Nothing to do with my PhD funding anyway. And also, I think for me, I felt a bit more confident going straight into a PhD because I was a research assistant for 2 years in my undergrad.
That's a good point, actually.
So from the beginning of my second year to the end of my third year, I was a research assistant working on, conducting a research study, multiple research studies, meeting academics, things like that. So I had confidence in presenting my research already and actually doing the research. So I guess the extra experience that you got in your masters I gained during my undergrad.
Yeah, that's such a good point.
Yeah. What was kind of the negatives, do you think, of doing?
Well, the one main negative was something that you actually mentioned, which was I just lost 2 years. Well, I didn't lose them.
You didn't lose 2 years at all.
So 1 year I did my master's, and then another year, because it was COVID, it was just an array for a year, which was great. But then again, I started my PhD 2 years later, which now I don't regret at all, but at the time I was having like mental breakdowns about it. I was like, oh, I'm going to finish my PhD when I'm going to finish it? 28, 29?
29, yeah.
That's scary. But now I don't regret it, but at the time, this was a point of contention in my brain.
Yeah, I think as PhD students, even for me, and I'm finishing earlier than you, I'm thinking, oh my God, obviously, I think a lot of people think PhD students, we're still students and we're still at school taking exams and stuff, even though we don't. I think when you're older, you see all of your friends that maybe aren't in academia working a job and have done all of their qualifications. So you kind of feel a bit more like a student for longer.
And obviously, it doesn't actually matter when you finish your PhD.
It doesn't.
It's just, I feel like all academics have this thing of having to do everything super quickly, otherwise they're a failure.
Yeah. And it can feel like you're a bit behind, but yeah, absolutely.
Don't regret it though. What are some of the cons of not doing a master's?
So some courses you actually need to have done a master's to do the PhD. I think that's a big con. I think I was very lucky in the fact that my undergrad sufficiently prepped me for my PhD, and my PhD program didn't need me to have done a master's. But I think a lot of the time you do need to have done a master's. And I think as well, when I started my PhD, it's probably just a self-confidence thing, but I did feel a little bit behind. So obviously you had done your master's study, and you'd kind of already done almost a literature review because you were really familiar with the area, and I was going into it brand new, and I felt, I'm really behind. Obviously you catch up in plenty of time, but I think that was just a self-confidence issue for me. So I was kind of thrown in the deep end with that.
I feel like I see that with lots of people who start a PhD right after undergrad. For the first few months, they feel like everything is going too quickly, but then they get used to it. Yeah. Those first few months I did feel really out of my depth, and I think it's, if you're kind of person that can adapt quite quickly, I think I can, it only took me like a couple of months to kind of find my feet, but I think if you're someone that maybe wouldn't be able to do that, then having that extra qualification behind you might help. You might also, even if your PhD program doesn't have a requirement to have a master's, you could be disadvantaged in the application process if you're up against someone with the same experience as you and they have a master's. Obviously, if you do really well in your interview and your application is amazing, then it might not matter, but that's something to consider as well. Sometimes people can publish their master's dissertations as well. Yeah. So that gives you kind of more of an insight into the peer review process and things like that. I say it's a disadvantage. You end up learning that anyway. You're just learning it at different times. So, that's true.
I'm learning about the peer review publishing process now, and I'm just starting my third year, and that's fine. I've learned it eventually. And I think, like you said, having more of a context of the area you want to go into, you'll meet the academics you need to, meet your supervisors, things like that. But, yeah. I wondered what the careers websites recommend. So obviously it's great us talking about our experiences, but we can only talk about so much. So I looked at the Prospects Careers website, and this Prospects is a a UK-based website that talks about lots of different career options and things like that. And one of the questions question answer thing they had on there was, do I need a master's to do a PhD? And they said that the majority of institutions require PhD candidates to possess a master's degree plus a bachelor's degree at 2-1 or above. However, they do say that some programs do allow you in without a master's. If you're a self-funded PhD student, or if you've got significant professional experience, you can be let in with lower grades or without a master's as well.
Yeah.
As well, they said, so this is what I was talking about earlier when I said you can have a 4-year full-time PhD. What that is that you can initially register for a 1 or 2 year MPhil, which is a Master of Philosophy, or an MRes, Master of Research. And then if you complete your MPhil or MRes, then you can be upgraded to a PhD program and then do your 3 years. I think that's what that means anyway.
Something else that's really important is to have some suggestions on why it can be a good idea to do a master's before a PhD. So we looked at the master's portal website, and they had some really good suggestions. So first of all, a master's can help you see if you're ready for a PhD. Again, doing more research, interacting with academics. Second of all, as Gemma mentioned earlier, you'll probably have a better chance of getting a PhD position if you have a master. Not necessarily, but it can be.
I mean, I got on.
Yeah, you got on, so anyone can.
Brutal.
If you have a bachelor's degree, which is not in the field that you want your PhD in, you need to do a master's in order to get into the PhD.
Yeah.
So you need to have a master for that.
Yeah.
As our sound technician, Ryan.
Yeah. Ryan, actually, fun fact, I'll tell you a bit about Ryan. He did a undergraduate degree in history, and then he did a master's in psychology. So then he was able to enter a new field, and that's how he's got into his PhD program.
Good job, Ryan. And then finally, in some countries like USA and Canada, you can actually transfer credits from master's to your PhD. So if you do a master's, you can actually finish faster.
So that actually counteracts what you were saying earlier about how
but we're in the UK, aren't we?
Yes, but if we've got, because we have got listeners from Canada and the USA, kind of counteracts what Guy was saying earlier, where she's going to get her PhD later. But in some countries, you can use your master's as part of your PhD, and then you end up doing your PhD in like 2 years.
Nice. So what would you do if you weren't sure on whether doing a master's was a good idea?
So I think the first thing to do is speak to your personal tutor if you're an undergrad, the careers people in your university, or the head of the master's program you're thinking about, or the postgraduate research lead as well in your department, and just see, what they expect, what typical PhD students have when they come in. If they say, okay, we only admit people that have a master's, then obviously that's your answer right there, but they might be able to put things into more context for you.
Yeah, something that I did as well was talking to academics in my area. Yeah. And most of them were like, you're probably going to have better chance to get a PhD if you're a master's, but they might not for whatever area you're in.
Yeah, absolutely. And also just having a look at the entry requirements on PhD courses. Most universities have websites with stuff, so have a look at that. What would be your top tip for, people that have done a master's and are starting a PhD?
So going back to the point of feeling like you're running out of time, I think it's really important to remember when you're surrounded by all those 21 years old, you need to remember that you didn't lose those years that you were doing your master's. You were actually just training, and that's going to help you doing your PhD. Yeah. What's your top tip?
So my top tip for people who are entering their PhD that haven't done a master's would be to ask around to see if you can attend some of those extra master's seminars or training courses, especially if you're feeling less confident about your research. I think for me, attending those in my first year really helped kind of gain confidence to be able to, and just knowledge about the research in general.
Brain bites!
Brain bites!
Woohoo!
Woo! So what are we talking about today? What's our brain bite for today?
Does going out in the sunshine help your well-being?
Yeah, I think this week it's actually been really sunny.
It's cold, but it's sunny.
It's cold but sunny. I think we're getting into spring.
It makes me so happy.
You know, it's really nice and we're having more sunny days. So I wondered if this actually helps our well-being.
Well, does it?
So we found a systematic review by, excuse my pronunciation, Taniguchi et al. In 2022. And they looked at the external natural environment, including sunshine exposure on public mental health.
So they showed that exposure to sunlight, spending time in green spaces, and physical activity all had a positive impact on people's mental health, including depression, anxiety, and stress states.
So get outside in that sunshine, put those sunglasses on, go for a little walk.
Get those freckles.
Get some freckles, and hopefully we're all feeling a bit more positive as we're going into spring. But that's everything for today, guys.
Yay.
I hope you really enjoyed this episode. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast on your chosen podcast platform. Leave us a 5-star review, of course. And where can people find us if they want to know a bit more behind the scenes stuff?
On social media at otherdoctor_pod.
You can also go to our website, which has all of our transcriptions on there as well. The link will be in the description.
Mm-hmm.
And a big thank you to the Royal Holloway Doctoral School for supporting this podcast, as well as our amazing podcast team that help us put on this podcast for you guys. Thanks so much.
Bye.
Bye.